Okay everybody, in this episode I'm going to be demonstrating how to use the direct to SpeedGrade function from Premiere. So this will be a little bit of a lesson on SpeedGrade as well. I'm going to show you how to get a project. If you don't want to use a Lumetri panel and you want to do a little bit more serious color correction, you're going to send this project from Premiere to SpeedGrade, and then you'll have a lot more functionality than you do in the SpeedGrade panel. Now the way that I'm going to be showing this is this little function up here. I'm going to go up to File and we're going to go down to Direct Link to Adobe SpeedGrade. There's two ways of getting these projects into SpeedGrade. One is considered maybe a little bit more of, I hesitate to say professional, but kind of the professional route, because it's going to be an EDL export, which basically means you're going to send over an edit decision list, which is kind of like a universal editing project file that is read by most coloring programs like DaVinci Resolve or SpeedGrade, and then you're going to open up this project with an EDL and reconnect all the footage. This just sends over what the direct link to Adobe SpeedGrade function does in Premiere. SpeedGrade is programmed to read directly the Premiere project file instead of making its own project file. And what that does is it's referencing this project file. That actually disables some of the features, like if you're working with raw footage, if you're working with Red, Alexa, or Blackmagic raw footage, you will no longer be able to access the raw footage to files like Red, Alexa, Blackmagic files. If you need to access those, you have to do it in Premiere and then send it over to, if you're going to change the raw data, you will have to change it in Premiere first and then send it over to Adobe SpeedGrade. And once you've sent it over to SpeedGrade, that's not permanent. Keep that in mind. You can send it over, you can do some changes, you can send it back to Premiere, and then later on you can change some of the raw settings in Premiere and then send it back over. That's one of the benefits of using the direct to SpeedGrade, is you can go back to Premiere, do some changes on the editing, send it back to SpeedGrade again, bring it back into Premiere. So that is very beneficial, but you just don't have access to the raw data. Hopefully someday we will. That would be nice. Then we won't have to do that whole EDL export anymore and just be able to have it very convenient if you're working within an Adobe environment. So let's get started here. I've got a timeline here that we're from a short film we're going to send over to SpeedGrade. So I'm going to hit File, and one thing to notice here that'll be kind of interesting is this has mixed camera footage. It has Blackmagic footage and it has Red footage as well. This was shot on two cameras, so it's shot on two cameras. And that's important to know because we've got a timeline of mixed footage here, of mixed resolutions of mixed footage. And that's interesting to know because if you have a timeline that has mixed resolutions, mixed footage, you can just send it right over to SpeedGrade, and SpeedGrade picks it up and just works with everything as if it's in a Premiere timeline, which is really nice. So I've got the timeline selected. I'm going to go up to File and hit Direct Link to Adobe SpeedGrade. It's going to say, it says we have to save all the changes to this project file, so SpeedGrade has the most recent updates. That's fine, so yes. And once it sends over to SpeedGrade, you will get this post-processing bar right here for a little bit. Depending on the length of the project, this might take anywhere up to like 5 minutes, but usually that won't take too long. That did it pretty quick actually, so that worked really quick. Sometimes that might take up to 5 minutes depending on if you have a really long project. But once it's sent over and it's done the processing, it adds that information to the project file, and the next time you bring it over to SpeedGrade, it doesn't take as long. Okay, so this is what we have when we come over to SpeedGrade. I do have a more in-depth tutorial of SpeedGrade. I'm going to post the link right here. There's the link for you to click on. You can go watch that if you want to, and that will go into more details with SpeedGrade, quite a bit more details. I'm going to go through kind of the basics here and show you how to get something color corrected and sent back to Premiere. Three major areas that we're going to be working with here is, this is your monitor up here. This is where it's going to be viewing what is in your timeline. Here's your timeline down here. As we kind of grab our playhead and move through this, we will see the footage that is on the playhead right here. This is our timeline right here. This is brought over from Premiere, and this is referencing the project file in Premiere to give you that exact edit that you had in Premiere. And down here is the color panel. I'm going to grab this and move it up a little bit so you can see that. And actually I'm going to minimize this right here. This is where you access a bunch of different looks and items that we'll go over in a little bit. I'm going to minimize that just so I have more room for my color correction panel here. One other thing that you're going to need are your scopes. I'm going to bring up the scopes by hitting my letter A, and it brings up the scopes here on the side. This will show your scopes here so you'll have nice accurate color correction. A couple things I'm going to do here to make this run a little bit faster. If you need this to run a little bit faster on your system, you can hit your little wrench up here. You can go to dynamic quality, and this is going to help, especially if you're working with 4K footage. If you're working with DSLR, this will usually run really well depending on your computer. But if you're running with Red footage, you're probably going to have to bring down the resolution while you're operating with it, which is fine if you're not using a 4K monitor to edit on. If you are using a 4K monitor, you're going to need some serious hardware. You're going to need some serious video cards or cards specifically built for color correction, like a Blackmagic card or an NVIDIA SDI card. But under dynamic quality here, if your system, usually this is pretty typical right here for red footage. It's going to be playing at a quarter resolution, especially on a monitor like this or a 1920 by 1080 monitor. You'll get pretty good playback resolution. But when it's paused, I'm going to have it at half resolution. Like I said, unless if you're editing in 4K and it's paused in half resolution, it's going to look just fine on a 1920 by 1080 monitor. But one thing you can do for playback is click this little down sample frame. So I would usually have this, unless you're working with DSLR. DSLR, I usually set this 1:1 and 1:2 if I have a good video card. Otherwise, for red footage, I have it like this here. But like I said, for a DSLR that runs at 1920 by 1080, you'll want this at 1:1 and 1/2, unless you're running 4K. Okay, so I'm going to check mark this down sample frames while it's playing back. Whatever window you have this size to here, this is playing at a much smaller window size, so you're going to tab this down sample to that resolution right there, so it doesn't look like it's losing quality, but it is just to play it back in this small window. And that will help speed things up a bit. I'm going to close that and press play, and now this is playing back pretty real time, so it's doing a good job playing that back real time there. So let's go over the scopes really quick. A couple of the scopes that I'm going to be using. First of all, I'm going to tell this. I usually put this as a 2-scope layout, so I don't have all 4 of these showing at once, because it's kind of hard to tell on a smaller monitor what scopes I'm dealing with here. So I'm going to tell this to show just 2 scopes. I like my vector scope. Over here, I'm going to tell it to show my parade. 2 of the very common scopes that I'm going to be using, and also at times I'll probably be using my waveform. This shows the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. I'm going to right click on this and switch that to Luma, so this is just showing brightness levels only. As a waveform is used for showing your brightness levels. From left to right, your 0 is where your details disappear in the dark. 100 is where your details disappear in the highlights, and this is your image from basically left to right. As we're moving across here, it's moving across a wall, and it's kind of down in the below your mid exposure region. As you get to this point, all of a sudden it boosts up and you have some spikes, some highlights, and that is from this bathroom door here. And as we move over, we got a little bit of spike that's a little bit on the face right there. And as we're moving further over, we got another spike into highlights, and that is this light back there. So that's basically how that works. You want to make sure that your details are never hitting 100, because that's where your detail is lost. And you want to make sure that your darks are never touching 0. You can get them really close to 0, just don't have them down close to 0. What people will oftentimes do to think they're getting contrast is they will darken their darks and crush them really dark like that. And then they're like, ooh, I've got contrast. But no, that's not how that works. We'll show you a better way of doing that. And it's called putting your brightness levels and exposure in your darks on a curve. And we'll talk about that. So I'm going to bring back my parade here. Down here, quick little instruction for this panel down here. You've got overall, shadows, midtones, and highlights. Whenever you click on anything here on your shadows, this whole panel here just became your shadows. You click on this whole panel just became your midtones, and so on. If you go to overall, this whole panel is now for your overall image. Down here you have offset. What I want you to notice, I'm going to bring up my waveform here. As we grab this offset, let me show you a quick way of turning your mouse into a virtual color correction tool. If you right click, don't hold it, just right click once, go click, and then let go of your right click. This just became your mouse just became a virtual tool for this. I'm going to move my mouse up and down, and notice it is controlling the offset here. If I right click again, it clears it. And now it's no longer a virtual tool here. If I go over to the colors here, right click on this, and now I just right clicked once, let go, I'm not holding down right click, and I move this around, move my mouse around, this just turned into a virtual wheel. And it's now changing the colors of that image. I'm going to right click again to get out of that. So just remember, right click once and let go, right click again, let go, and it toggles off the virtual mouse as a color corrector. These are the clear buttons right here. I'm going to clear my settings for the color. I'm going to clear my settings for the brightness. By the way, these are brightness sliders here. They just work with the luminance on the image here, and this works with the colors. And the offset, what the offset does specifically, watch this, as I right click on this and I start moving it up, it takes your entire image and just boosts everything at the same rate. So that basically just boosts the brightness of the entire image right there. I'm going to clear that. Let's go to gamma. So I right click on this and now I start moving up. What this does with the gamma is it takes more of the mid region and starts to boost that up. So you can look at this as the offset as basically the overall. It'll brighten, it'll bring up everything simultaneously. The gamma will bring up kind of this mid section of your brightness levels. I'm going to clear that. And the gain, as I start pulling this up here, notice it brings kind of the top region of my image and starts stretching that up. It's almost like the brights in your image. It starts stretching those up there. So offset, once again, brings up the entire image, boosts everything at the same time. Gamma kind of grabs the mid region, and the gain grabs the top region. As you go to the shadows, what this will do is it will operate within the shadow region down here. The offset, kind of the same thing, will boost all of your shadow region. The gamma will kind of bring up the mid region of your shadows, and the gain will bring up the upper end of the upper region of your shadows. That's kind of the darker region of your image down here. So if we grab the gain, start moving that up, notice it's just kind of grabbing this region right here of my darks and bringing them up. So you have a lot of control over this. The midtones, the same, is going to be in the mid region right here with the offset gamma gain, and your highlights will be just this upper region. Watch this as we grab the gain on the, see how it's just stretching this top region of my highlights? And gamma will get kind of the mid region of my highlights, and offset will grab the entire section of my highlights and bring them up. Going to reset all of those. Okay, what we've got down here is this little panel right here. Once you've understand these panels right here with these controllers and these controllers up here, you've almost got all of SpeedGrade down. You have a lot of control over what you're doing. There's a lot more to SpeedGrade than that, of course, but these are just the basics here. Have input saturation. This is your saturation. As I grab this and start sliding, I right click on it, and now I start moving my mouse left or right. This will boost saturation before, or take away saturation before these controls take over. So these controls will be based on your input saturation, on the saturation amount from your input saturation. So if you change your saturation here, then these controls will be based on that. If you try to boost colors in those regions and you've desaturated this a bit, that saturation is basically your color amount, how concentrated the colors that are in your image are. Watch as we grab this and I move it over. And by the way, if you hold down Shift while you're moving your mouse, it does it a lot faster. See what's happening? Our colors are boosting there. Now these things will operate based on that saturation level, but the final saturation will not touch your saturation before these panels are used. You can use these panels first, then your final saturation will change saturation based on the color corrections you've made here. That's the difference between input and final saturation. These are quick color sliders here. So these are very helpful to work with your magenta color range, your magenta color temperature basically. You can add more greens and purples here. It's a quick slider, very useful. And then you've got your temperature slider, which works with mainly your blues and your reds. So you have your blues and reds, and you have your greens and magentas here, and your combination of colors in between. Your contrast slider, watch what happens when we right click on this and move it. This is contrast right here. This is what happens with contrast. Look at our waveform there. As I move this to the right, notice it is stretching our waveform out. It's taking the highlights higher and the darks darker. That is what contrast is called, is when you stretch that out. And look at the image that you get. You get more distance between your darks and your highlights, and you get more of a cinematic image. Let me clear this and look at the before. Watch this as I clear it. There's your before and undo. There's your after. So you can see what's happening there. But we are crushing our darks, so we're going to talk about not doing that. And now you have your pivot. And then you have your pivot, which is which alters your contrast. Watch this as I grab the contrast and I add a little bit more contrast to this image, and it's crushing the darks. The pivot, watch what this does. After you've added contrast, you can decide to lift your darks a little bit right there, and it'll bring it above the 0, which doesn't kill your darks. Or you can right click on this and drag it to the right, and it will crush them. So pivot will bring your entire image down. And once you've added contrast, you have to have had added contrast for the pivot to work. And once you've added contrast, you can either crush those darks or bring them up. So it changes where the contrast basically takes place, kind of the center position of where the contrast takes place. This helps so you don't crush your darks as you're adding contrast to your image. Now we can make this more contrasty without completely crushing it. Change the pivot, get my pivot over here, and now those details aren't crushed in the darks, and we're still getting some nice contrast. So those are the basic tools. Let's do some color correction here. I'm going to reset this. I'm going to just go down to my entire, these are your layers down here that we're adding to this individual shot. I'm just going to go down here and reset my entire primary level. This is your entire primary color correction right here. Anything that's changed in there is updated in this little filter over here. This basically is your lumetri color. Anything that's done here, it's going to basically add it into this lumetri color, which is added as a filter in Premiere when we send this back. So let's do some color correction here. I'm going to select my primary level. Let's move into a shot where we need to do some correction here. Here are two shots done with two different cameras. And by the way, if you want to zoom in to a shot here, all you have to do is hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, and you use your mouse to scroll. It'll zoom up to it really close once you start scrolling. But now, holding down Alt or Option, I'm scrolling my mouse right here and zooming in and out of this clip. So I've zoomed into it here so I can kind of really see what I'm doing on my timeline here. As I cut between two shots here, notice this shot is really dark and this shot is really light. Watch what happens as we play. right there. This shot is way too dark, this shot is way too light. And you look at your waveform over here and you can tell that. Tell that this is really high lit shot, this is kind of underexposed. So what I want to do is I want my shot to look maybe a little bit more like this. Let's get this shot exactly where we need to, and then we're going to match the next shot. I'm going to go down to my gamma and bring down the mids a little bit and bring this down a little bit darker. Notice I've got my highlights that are hitting 100. I'm going to grab those highlights and bring those down. See, that's not quite grabbing them quick enough. I just want the tips. I don't want the whole highlight. So what I'm going to have to do here is go to highlights and bring down just the gain of my highlights and get them down to about 95, what's called IRE. This is an IRE scale, by the way. 0 to 100 IRE. Institute of Radio Engineers is what that stands for. It's a standard setup for broadcast. So now I'm going to go to my midtones. Actually, let's go to overall. I can bring down, I'm just going to bring down the offset, the entire shot, just a little bit. There we go. That's getting in the region where I like it. So I like the look there. Let's look at our color temperature now for this shot. I'm going to get everything adjusted on this shot. By the way, this is a YUV vector scope here. Basically shows your reds, green, blues, your cyans, yellows, magenta. It shows this on this chart, a saturation chart. This is a huge hue and saturation chart. It shows your general hue that we have a lot of reds and we have a lot of blues as well. We have higher concentration of reds than we do going between the red and yellow there. Then we do the blue and cyan there. A little bit of concentration of blue and cyan. Now this is your saturation. The further it goes out from the center point, the more saturated it is. Let me demonstrate. We'll grab our saturation, right click on that, hold down shift to make this extreme, and I'm going to boost this way out. Look at our saturation and grow out towards our points. So the hue is still the same. It's still the general direction of color, but it just has more of that color. I'm going to clear that, right click on this, and I'm going to move it down. So if we desaturate this all the way to 0 where there's no color, it sucks into a little fine point, and this shows there is no color in that shot. I'm going to clear this. But I want to do kind of a, what would be called a balanced, I kind of want to balance the color for this shot. I'm going to right click on this, I'm going to show my parade. This is going to be helpful for balancing a shot. Actually, this is already fairly balanced. It looks like it's properly color balanced. You have your red channel, green channel, and blue channel on a waveform, and it's showing about the same amount of brightness levels in your red, your green, and your blue. They're all about the same. This shot is fairly balanced already. If we go to the next shot here, you're going to see that this shot looks a little bit more kind of bluish and maybe magenta. You look at your blue channel, it is higher. It is more boosted. Actually, is boosted more in the highlights and boosted more in the reds. So you get a combination of the highlight blues and the reds that are not quite matching, and a little bit of suppressed green color there. Let's boost this up so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to bring it, right click on my gamma, boost that up. Right about there. It looks about the same brightness level as the previous clip. But let's start manipulating specifically the blue here. But let's start messing. I'm going to go to overall. I'm going to start messing with the magenta and temperature sliders here to get this shot to look more balanced. I'm going to bring down the red mids here. So let's start on overall and see what we get. I'm going to right click on this and start bringing this temperature over. Notice that is bringing down the reds, but boosting up the blue highlights. So I can go to my highlights, go to my temperature, and that's not quite doing anything, so I'm going to have to, this is probably more mid-tone range that's been boosted up, so I'm going to go to temperature here on the mid-tones, and there we go. That's getting those highlights kind of brought down a little bit. Let's go to our magenta and boost the greens a little bit, and try to get these to conform as much as possible, so they look about the same there. And that's looking a little bit more highlight of reds in the mids, so I'm going to grab this, and let's go to overall, and keep messing with this, and bring down the reds a little bit. So here is a before and after. That's before, that's after. This is, by the way, hold down 0 on your numpad will show before and after. I'm holding it down now. That's before. You let go. That's after. So we're getting more of a balanced shot there. We're getting kind of, this is starting to look more color temperature treated here. But now let's add our contrast to the shot. Let's go from this shot to the next. See, this still looks a little cool to me. And we do have a little higher push in the reds than we do in this shot, so I'm going to go to temperature on this shot and bring down the reds a little bit. So these are all the mids here are kind of conforming. Look at these spikes here, and they're looking about the same. Actually, we're getting a big push right there in the red and the green. Let's bring up the blue right about there. Those are looking a little closer. Now as we cut from this shot to the next, those are now matching. We've matched those shots by using our RGB parade to get these balanced and looking about the same. So now we can start working with a look on this shot. Let's, I want to get this shot a little bit more contrasty. I can grab my contrast slider. I can drag this over to the right. I don't want to hit my zeros there on the waveform, so I'm going to make this contrasted to where it looks good. I'm going to barely touch to get that stretch going. Now grab my pivot And by the way, I'm doing this on overall. I'm going to pull my pivot down so it brings up those darks so they're not quite touching. So here's our before, and there's our after. So we're getting kind of this little more cool look, a little more balanced look than we had before. And you can go more warm if you want to, but this is kind of the look that I'm going for. I like that. I'm going to play, cut to the next shot, and this needs a little contrast as well. So I'm going to right click, add contrast. My blues are kind of spiking out, or spiking on the bottom there. I'm going to grab my pivot, bring that over. I'm going to go to the shadows, and I'm going to boost the shadows on the blues there. I'm going to right click my temperature and move it away from the blues. Right click on my temperature, slide it over to the left here, and get those shadows to come up a little bit. So there we go. So we've matched those two shots. They look pretty good cutting from shot to shot there. And that's basically going to be the process. One other thing I kind of want to show is like having ultimate control over a shot, especially with the contrast. Let's work on this shot specifically right here. So on this shot, basically I've got kind of a low exposure, so I'm going to grab my offset. Overall, I'm going to bring up the exposure on this shot first of all. But now I want to add some contrast to this shot. This shot looks like it's fairly balanced. Maybe the red and green are a little bit more prominent than the blue. And grab our temperature slider, move this around a bit, and see what we get. And now we want to add contrast to this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to shadows. We're going to control this on what's called a curve. We're going to manually do a curve. There are a couple ways of doing curves. I'll show you one other way. I'm going to go to shadows, and basically what the curves do, we'll bring it down the darks. It'll create it. So first of all, basically what a curve does, you can do actually a little visual curve down here. You're going to have a lot more power in the look panel with curves, but if you go down here and hit the plus button, you can add a curve right here. You arrow this down, and we're going to do an RGB curve. The RGB curve will bring up these panels here. We have access to the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel individually, or all of them at once over here on this master channel. This point down here represents the darks in your shot. This point represents the highlights. And as you bring up things to this area here, this is the highlight exaggeration region. This is the darks exaggeration region. So if you grab your highlights, drag them down, the highlights will come down until they're completely dark. Reset that. And darks as well. If you pull this down, notice the darks will get darker. If we grab this region down here and grab that, and we're going to start dragging that over, it's going to exaggerate the darks, and the darks get darker. If you grab a portion of your highlights and drag them over, the highlights will get brighter and brighter, and that's basically how that works. Now you can put this on a curve, and this is going to help you create contrast. We're going to grab kind of the darks down near the bottom. This will help us this will help to keep from crushing the dark regions. I'm going to drag that over, and then I'm going to go up to the highlights and boost them a little bit. So we're boosting the highlights while darkening the darks, and that generates contrast. So look at this before and after. That's a little more flat. Undo, and we've added more contrast to the shot. That's basically what a curve does, and you get more of a contrasty, and you get more of a cinematic contrast going there. So I'm going to reset that. If you go to the look panel, actually let's get rid of I'm going to get rid of the RGB curve filter there by hitting the little delete there on the primary. We're going to go into the shadows. We're going to grab a portion of the kind of the gamma region of the shadows, and we're going to drag those down. I'm not going to touch the offset because I don't want to crush my darks. We're just bringing down the mid region of the darks here. And the gain as well, we can bring those down a little bit, so it brings down all the darks there except for the very bottom. Now you can go to your highlights or your midtones and go to the upper end of your midtones and start boosting those up, and we're getting a stretched region now, which is giving us contrast. And you have a lot of control over the fine tuning of your contrast here. Let's look at the before and after. As before, there's after. Let's go to our previous shot here. So for this there's a shot that we were working on here. Let's do a quick balance. Right now our reds are really low, so I'm going to go to the temperature on our overall, right click, and we're going to move this over toward the red to kind of boost the reds and bring them up. And grab our magenta slider, bring down the greens. So I'm not getting much range there, so we're going to have to kind of go in the shadows. Boost up the reds and the shadows, so the reds and blues are about the same, and then bring down the greens in the shadows. And now let's work with the highlight region here. Go in the highlights, even out the reds and blues in the highlights, and boost up the greens in the highlights. There we go. But now we want to add contrast to this. Right now this is a very flat shot, so I'm going to add contrast. I'm going to go into the shadows. So I'm going to go to my overall here. I'm going to bring down the offset just a little bit, just so it's down near 0 but not quite touching 0. Right there. And I'm going to go to my midtones. I'm going to boost up the upper end of my midtones here. Let's bring up the gamma part. Bring up the offset of the midtones just a little bit. Go to my shadows, and so you can just sit here and play with this stuff until you kind of get the image that you want with that contrast that exists. See right there, I'm bringing them down to almost to 0 without quite touching 0. And let's look at our before and after. There's before, there's after, so we kind of have a completely different look. The greens are a little kind of high in this one, so I'm going to go to my magenta and bring down the greens overall and add a little bit more contrast. Let's do this. Now that I've got this kind of in the region where it's looking good, I'm going to go to curves and just do a little bit of a manual curve and kind of exaggerate the darks, the highlights, and make this look kind of dark and creepy now. And there we go. So here's the before. There's the after. We've kind of balanced it a little bit, and we've darkened it up and make it look a little bit more dark and creepy. So a lot of this is just kind of experimentation, but as the point being, as you go from shot to shot, you want to try to match things as much as possible. But your main panel that you're going to be using is your look panel and on your primary layer here. So you're going to be doing primary color corrections on each clip, and all you have to do with SpeedGrade is you play from clip to clip. See, now these shots are kind of mismatched, so I'm going to have to get this one here to match the previous shot. I'm going to have to color balance it. I'm going to have to get it kind of balanced and then darken it. Let's just do a quick little version of that. I'm going to go to overall, I'm going to grab my temperature. Let's just do a quick little experiment here. Slide that up and down, find the right region to get kind of that contrasty look right about there. I'll lay off the darks a little bit. Let's see what we get there as we cut from this shot to that one. This one seems a little more saturated than the other shot. Looking at the saturation on my scope here, this doesn't look as saturated as much as this one does, and this one's going off towards the yellows a little bit. So we can go to our final saturation since we've already done a grading, and I'm going to bring down the saturation just a little bit to get that to match. And then as we play through, and now it looks a lot better. Alright, one other thing I'm going to do to kind of match this here, the contrast is coming across a little heavy. Actually, I can just grab these curves. Every little filter that you have down here, you'll have an opacity. I'm going to bring down the opacity on that. It's going to kind of not make it so extreme on the contrast. Right about there. Darken it a teeny bit more. Bring down my gamma on the overall. And let's play from the first shot to the next. Plays from here. And looks pretty good, matching from side. And it's just playing with things so you get them to match and you get the look that you want. Okay, when you are finished doing your color correction in SpeedGrade and you've got everything corrected and everything looking good, all you have to do is go up to this little Premiere button. You click on that, and this will send it back to Premiere. I'm going to hit yes to save it. I'll save the changes. It'll open it up back in Premiere. And now these files have been affected. This one's been affected, and the way it affects this, if you want to look at the original, you still can. I'm going to select this clip and go up to the effect controls, and you'll notice it has added this little Lumetri color filter. And if you need to do some changes, you can actually send it back to SpeedGrade and do the changes on it. But right now, I'm just going to uncheck this and look at, there's my before, there's my after. Go to the next clip and select the next clip and turn off the filter for that one. There's the before, there's the after. And as we play through these two, they match pretty good, looks pretty good. All right, going to show one other thing here. So everything that I've done correction for shows up as a filter, shows up as an effect inside of Premiere as a Lumetri effect. But I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to kind of add a final look to my entire project here. I'm going to go down to my little new item icon and create a new adjustment layer. Actually, I already have one in there that'll create one of these adjustment layers. I'm going to grab this and drop it in here, put it up above everything. I'm going to add a specific look to my entire movie, actually to just that section right there. So I don't need to have that all the way up. I'm going to just have it over all my main footage, not my titles. So I've added this adjustment layer. The adjustment layer is going to affect everything below this. So now that that adjustment layer has been added, I'm going to go back up to File, send it back to SpeedGrade, save it, and SpeedGrade will have added that adjustment layers. I still have all the filters, I still have all the effects that were added before, but now notice it's reading the Premiere project file. So this is a change that's been made to have an adjustment layer. So now I can actually select this adjustment layer, and I'm going to add a look. I'm going to go down here, and actually if we just start messing with this adjustment layer, this is going to affect everything below it. See, if I darken it like that really dark and move down to other clips, everything else has been affected under that adjustment layer. So I'm going to clear this. So this is affecting everything. So say you want a very specific look for your movie here. Let's go into the corrected clips I had before. Go right there. So let's add a specific look for the entire movie. I'm going to click on my little expand here. We're going to go down to film stock, and we're going to look at some of these looks down here. And all you have to do is mouse over these, and it will add that look to your adjustment layer there. You have different types of film stock here. I'm going to hit this little maximize button right there and get this full screen so I can really see what I'm doing here. See, and I kind of like maybe a little bit warmish Kodak look right there. I'm going to double click on that and it will apply that. I'm going to select this one and it will add it to my adjustment layer as what's called the LUT, a lookup table there. It's added that to that adjustment layer, and now I have that look. Let's turn this off, hit the little eyeball right there, turn it off. There's before with my corrected image, and there's after with the look. And I really like that look. If you like the look but it's too extreme, you can actually go to the opacity here and turn it down, dial it down to where you like. Hold down shift and move that over slowly, right about there. So let's look at the before and after. There's before. There's with the look, and it will add this look to the entire movie. So there's my corrected clip. So look at it before and after, and I kind of like that because all this stuff kind of falls off in the dark if you're doing kind of a creepy thing, so I think that works. And there's the before and after with the adjustment layer, and we have that very specific look. And you can go back, if now this seems maybe a little too hot, you can go back and do some corrections on the primary file there, and then when you're done, send it back to Premiere again. So let's send this back. You'll notice on the adjustment layer, that Lumetri look has been added to this. So if I turn that off, there's without the LUT, there's with. So I've got the effect, the Lumetri effect added to the clip, and I also have the look, what I'm calling the look, added to the adjustment layer. So that is basically how it's done, the Direct to SpeedGrade link. If you want to watch more advanced tutorials, like I said, I have that link. You can go back and watch the tutorial on SpeedGrade and get a better understanding of how SpeedGrade works, and you'll have more power, and then you'll have a lot more power to control the looks of your shot. So if you have any questions, please post them, and I'll try to get back with you. Thank you.